Jack, how are you?
I'm good, Tim. Good to be with you always on Lead Human.
Ditto. I got a question. Is this a Connecticut phenomenon where I live, or maybe are you seeing this same thing in Arizona? But when did the turn signal become optional while driving? Are you seeing this?
Well, in Arizona, I think it's always been optional. I'm not sure but that's a really good question. Certainly moving to the right, but to the left, I think yellow. I think the yellow light means go faster.
And that's okay. I don't think this is even an age phenomenon, but I find it to be. I mean, is the turn signal going to go the way of the buggy whip in a car? It's just weird to me, and it's not a Connecticut thing.
No, I don't think so. Now, are you talking because it's interesting. You went to the turn signal on the car,
Yeah.
and I went to the turn signal on the traffic light that people are also ignoring.
I see. I see. Yeah.
And it works both ways. So, it's a real, both are good questions because is it a change in the human nature in
Right.
whether we feel we need to inform other people or pay attention to signs, whether we're giving them or getting them?
Right. And I just love thinking about people and looking kind of getting above it and thinking, are these regional differences? Are these age differences, gender differences? And why I was asking about the regional aspect, but I can say it's not an age or a gender thing from what I'm seeing where I live. And you're saying maybe you agree. Same thing, kind of where you're seeing the same thing.
What's interesting, Tim, is, you took it to the people, the human thing. I'm going to stay with that because I think you've raised something that is potentially a major issue and point of how people respond to human signs, the signs that we've always been able to give, and whether they're people, what are we becoming a narcissistic ecosystem where people don't have to pay attention to the human
Right.
signs or the mechanical signs that we've lived by for a lifetime.
All right. Well, we're just raising it. We want everyone to think about it, and we'll see where it goes.
Small question, Tim, that
Yeah.
I think we could get a lot of feedback from. So I appreciate your asking that.
All right. Want to kick on?
Yeah, let's go.
All right, great. So, greetings, humans, and welcome to Lead Human. I'm Tim Spengler, along with my co-host, the futurist and author, Mr. Jack Myers. We're part of the Acast Creator Network. And our show each week in about 30 minutes or so aims to prove that even though data dashboards and AI are important qualities, that the real competitive advantage in business is not about better managing the machine, but about unleashing the human potential. And this is Lead Human. All right, Jack, interesting guest this week. I didn't know him too well, but we got introduced, and I think he's interesting, and we'll have some hopefully great insights for those who have more of an entrepreneurial mindset. So Joe Root is the co-CEO, founder of Permutive, and he's someone who's grown up in London. He now lives in New York, so he's managing both coasts. It's an ad tech company that has gotten a lot of interesting backers. Started with Y Combinator as their initial backer, and I think he's 10 plus years into growing this company, and really curious to hear about the entrepreneurial mindset and what it takes to be successful in this area.
And Tim, when Permutive and Joe got suggested, and you asked me to check them out, and I looked it up, and Permutive seems to have been shaped from the beginning, not just by technology, but by values in its original story, a response to privacy issues and trust, but also focused on human agency. And that's what really appealed to me and why I thought he'd be a great guest. And I'm interested in asking Joe not just about the nature of his business, but also about how he thinks.
Yeah, exactly. All right, let's bring him on. Joe, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Really great. We're going to jump right in. First question. If you've been listening, you'll already know what it is. So the first question is kind of a grounding question. Not about what you do, but about who you are. So tell us, who are you as a person and what's it like to be you, to kick us off?
I've had this question rattling around in my mind all weekend, so I've been well prepared for it, but still couldn't come up with a good answer for it. Like on a very personal note, definitely a dad and a husband. I've got a little 2-year-old daughter who
Nice.
just lights up my world, and it's a constant journey of discovery. I think more generally, though, probably like very heavily shaped by my parents and by my immediate family. So as a person, I think they've had a huge impact on who I am, what I believe in. So my dad was a pastor,
Uh-huh.
and my mum's a therapist. My aunt, who I'm very close to, is a therapist. My uncle was the CEO of an autistic kids charity. I think they've very heavily shaped kind of both a sense of mission in life and the importance of having a mission, and then also very heavily shaped kind of a perspective on community and what community can be. And I suppose for me, those are things which give me a lot of energy and probably shape who I am and what I care about in life.
That's nice. And specifically, where did you grow up?
So grew up in London.
City of in this in the
Yeah,
city.
in the city of London, so in North London, and spent pretty much my entire life there, outside of the last few years in New York.
Okay. You so in doing a little homework up on you, you seem like a serial entrepreneur. And I know a lot of folks listening they're weighing, should I be one? Should I just have a side hustle? Should I go all in being an entrepreneur? Am I better with my skill sets being part of a larger company? So from an advice standpoint, tell us about the ingredients that you have that make you an entrepreneur, and ones that people should be thinking as they look themselves in the mirror to, which way should I go, or a little bit of both.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's a hard question to give a consistent answer to everyone on. I think
Okay.
when I went down the journey of starting a company with my co-founder, we had very little risk in life. We'd just come out of university.
Hmm.
The job market was booming at that point in time, and taking a year or two to try and start a company, if it didn't work out, it wasn't going to have a huge impact on our life. So I think we started a company with a lot of freedom to for things not to go well, and I think that kind of the relief of not having that pressure on us allowed us to do things at our own pace. I think created quite good conditions for starting a company for us.
What year was that, Joe, that you started the
That
company?
was so we started in 2014. So yeah, give or take about 12 years now of doing this. And me and my co-founder actually tried to start multiple companies before then. So we met in our first week of college. Throughout college, we were trying to start companies. After we finished college, we went and tried to start a company again. That didn't work out. We both went and worked for a couple of months and then came back and tried to start a company again. So there's probably kind of 2 or 3 years trying to start companies before Permutive. And then when we started Permutive, I would say really the first 3 or 4 years, we were wandering in the wilderness. It took us about 3 years to really figure out what we were doing and what we were focused on. So the journey of getting to what the company is today, I would say it was a 6 or 7 year journey before we even got there.
Right. And how about you as a person? So give us the ingredients, or give us what you think are the ingredients for people who are listening to when they're making again, they're looking themselves in the mirror. Which way should I go? What plays better to my strengths? What do
Yeah.
you think I know you said you can't, it's not one specific thing, but maybe there's a few things that kind of are always kind of coming up.
Yeah. So I think we started the company, we went out to Y Combinator, which is
Right.
startup investor over in the
Sure.
Valley. So Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, was kind of running Y Combinator at that point in time. It's a really great place to be in. They'd seen a lot of kind of successful founders on that journey all the way to these enormous companies. And they framed being a CEO as two things, or being kind of founder as two things. The first stage is building a great product. And then the second stage is building a great company. I think those are two very different skills. Certainly for the first phase of building great products, I think kind of a real obsession with problems, a love of ideas. I certainly, on a personal level, believe the most important trait is resilience. I think you get knocked down so much, the ability to pick yourself back up and keep going. I think those traits bubble together, or certainly from my perspective, kind of the combination of resilience and curiosity that can really bubble away to find a product and to build something meaningful. I think the notion of what it's required to build a great company is a much harder one. And I've seen a much broader spectrum of folk do that really well, from people who love to be in the details and remain kind of almost operators as founders, all the way through to just really amazing managers and people leaders. I think there's a broad spectrum in that kind of latter half of founding a company.
So let's continue on that thread. You said building a great product, building a great company. Let's talk about building a great team. And how do you perceive your role and responsibilities as a leader in building a team beyond delivering on the financial success?
Yeah. So it's been a real journey for me. So I can't say that I came from a long, illustrious career having already built great teams, and this was just kind of another run at it.
But a pastor and two therapists probably help
yes,
on that
journey. Yes, quite. So I think in terms of building a great team, there's stuff which came quite naturally. For example, my dad as a pastor really believed in multicultural churches. So that was his thing. He really wants to build a church where people from all around the world could be a part of it. So I think for me, some parts of that I really took from kind of my dad and his journey. So I love the idea of building a team where anyone could feel at home in it, no matter who you are. I really love that being part of a church meant that the people who came into it had a very clear sense of purpose and mission and vision. So those are the things which I think kind of came quite naturally, setting a very clear vision and purpose for Permutive, making sure we had a culture which was inclusive and would bring people into the team. But then there were a lot of traits which I had to learn along the way, things which didn't come as naturally. So, for example, really understanding and playing to the strengths of folk in the team just wasn't the way my mind used to work, of really trying to understand, hey, not just, oh, this person is great at marketing, but hey, this is how the person thinks about the world. This is the unique thing their thinking brings to this team. And this is how we layer the team together to do that. So we actually really subscribe to kind of this bloke called Patrick Lencioni writes these kind of great books on building a team and how you assemble that. One of the pieces in it is this thing called Working Genius, which is a way of trying to understand how people think. So I think that was something which took a while to kind of learn and to develop. The other piece, which has been a journey, has been creating that sense of psychological safety in the team so that the team can feel safe to argue, to debate things, to have heated discussions. But at the end of that, we can walk away knowing that personal relationships haven't been impacted and that we're aligned and focused on the same outcome, and that everything which kind of came before that was healthy and good. I think having therapist parent kind of helped with that in some regards, but there was a lot I had to learn about what does that look like, and still learning.
So I like that you focus on, understanding the strengths of each individual team member. You built a company, you talk about purpose, mission. At the foundation of that, from what I read about Permutive, you're really focused on privacy, trust. So in a privacy-focused world, especially in an advertising world where, breaking through privacy is kind of one of the core metrics that are required. How do you decide what's right versus what's just defensible to your clients?
It's a great question. And something we always come back to as a business, even at our last leadership offsite, this is something kind of our chief product officer kind of brought to the surface again. I think what we really believe needed to change in advertising, wasn't kind of the case before, was when given choice, advertising should respect that consumer's choice around their privacy preferences. And that may seem quite obvious now, but at the time when we were really digging into this around 2016, 2017, consumers hadn't been given choice before. So all of a sudden, Apple was giving them choice over their privacy. Regulators in Europe were giving people choice over their privacy. It was starting to happen in America as well. And the first response of a lot of the digital advertising ecosystem was, okay, well, how do we work around this? So how do we find a new hack which gets around this? I remember one point in time, there was an ad tech business who every week would release a new version, and then Apple would release something to try and break what they'd done. And you almost felt it was going to destroy the internet as a whole. Really, what we grounded everything in was you respect the consumer's choice around privacy. If that consumer has shared a decision, you respect that and you do not in any way circumvent that. And when you follow that all the way through, what we realize is actually you need to rebuild the foundational principles of digital advertising if you want to be able to respect those consumers' choices around privacy. So many of the assumptions in the first version of what we built as an ecosystem was that actually you didn't need to kind of understand the consumer's choices around privacy. So you could just do pretty much whatever you want. Actually, when you kind of build with that framework in mind, you realize the very foundations of this thing have to be rebuilt.
Go ahead, Tim.
All right. Let's move this conversation to something about communication. You've raised a lot of money. Obviously started with one of the best backers, Y Combinator. I didn't know the Sam Altman part. That's awesome. Give us some tips on how you sell a vision, both to potential investors or backers, and also internally. What are the tips to being a good communicator and selling a vision? It's just so innate. It doesn't pop up easily, huh?
I wish it was innate. In some places, it came very naturally internally. In some places, it was definitely a learning curve of how do you communicate this to investors. I think probably the most important thing I had to recognize was that people had different mental models of the world. And if I couldn't adapt my communication style to that mental model of the world and the thing they were trying to understand, it didn't matter how well I told the story. If it wasn't overlain with that mental model, it didn't matter. So to give a kind of more real example of this is investors have a very specific mental model of the world, which they're trying to match you to. So they're really trying to figure out, hey, has this company uncovered some major disruption? And if that major disruption unplays, could this be a fund returner for me? Now, without knowing kind of the psychology of an investor, initially I would just go in and tell the story I was passionate about telling. I loved telling this story about privacy and what we were doing, and I found it very motivational. But actually, an investor wasn't looking at it through kind of the lens I was, where I'm so connected to what we're doing and making publishing work and all these pieces. Instead, they were really trying to understand, hey, is there this foundational disruption in the world, and does Permutive play into that? And I think when I started to learn that, hey, each of these constituent parts who I'm telling this vision or telling this story to have a very different mental model and are trying to map Permutive to a very different mental model. Like a employee is not looking at what an investor is. Part of it is a shareholder, they might, but they're trying to understand what's the culture, how am I going to grow, how am I going to develop in this organization? It's very different. So over time, I kind of really started to learn that, hey, that story has to be adapted based on the environment I'm in. And in general, that actually starts with a deep curiosity about who you're going out to talk to in the first place. Once you've understood them and kind of really dug into that, then the storytelling became much more simple downstream of that.
That sounds so simple, but right. But a lot of people are right, as you say, are so passionate just to tell the story that they've honed in their mind with their teams.
Yeah.
But it's like, hold on. Before we even say what we want to say, how does this person who we're about to meet with view the world, and what are they looking for?
Totally. So one of the worst things would be I'd go into fundraising would take us somewhere between 3 and 6 months. So you're spending a lot of time with investors telling the story over and over again. One of the worst things which would happen after each fundraise is I would then go back out to our customers, and I'd be in a customer pitch and I start telling them the same story as telling investors. And this thing just wasn't landing. And it would always take me like a couple of weeks to get back to, hey, actually, that story was for investors.
Oh my God.
Customers and prospects we're speaking to looking for something so different.
Jack, can I just do the follow-up on the internal?
Go ahead.
So that's how you sell it to investors. How do you sell a vision to your teams?
Great question. So I think with Permutive, the internal story tends to map more towards, I suppose, what I see is my co-founder Tim and I still kind of very heavily involved in the business day to day, and I think the story we tell internally maps a lot more to what Tim and I care about. So when we talk about our vision and our role in the world, that is very much located in our desire to create this open internet which survives and thrives. And that's kind of how we communicate it. I think what we've really had to learn and get a lot better at internally is sometimes for both Tim and I, we can live 4 or 5 years out in the future of what we're passionate about and where we believe the company can go and what we believe we can do. And that can be a bit disconcerting for people in the business when it's so far disconnected from the day to day. I think kind of the journey which we've learned internally is really trying to avoid telling a story which sits too far out in the future that people can't apply it to themselves day to day. So kind of before we have any company communication now, a lot of the time we spend kind of discussing and debating around it is really what is it that we're hoping people take and do with this information which we're giving them, so that it can be more grounded in the present and the day to day. Because without that, what we found is we could create a lot of noise, a lot of swirl at the business, and that wasn't always that helpful.
Well, Joe, it's interesting. The future is coming at us a lot faster than it ever has before. And moving from the startup story and the internal belief system to where we are today and how dramatically technology not only has changed since you launched more than a decade ago, but even in the last few days and weeks, we're seeing AI beginning to accept advertising. That's going to accelerate quickly. I want to give a shout out to the work you're doing with Anthony Katzer at the IAB Tech Lab, and that's important work. When you launched, you really had a focus that there was the issues of privacy in the advertising media marketing business were broken. So as you're doing the work today with Anthony and the IAB, and as you're looking at that, not just that 5-year curve, but that 12-month curve, what's broken today in the business that needs to be fixed and that you're hoping to work on fixing?
Yeah, I think it's a good reframing. Probably what was 5 years, 5 years ago now happens over the course of 12 months or so.
12 days even.
Yeah, quite. I think what has been true and remained true about the business is our focus was always how do you build a sustainable internet? So what was really obvious when we kind of stepped into the world was kind of for the main constituent players on the open internet, the ones who kind of really the downstream partners to all of us, the economics just weren't adding up. So consumers didn't love the advertising experience. They were opting out of it. That all of a sudden meant digital advertising technology systems were breaking. Agencies, advertisers weren't reaching consumers, publishers weren't making money. It was just a very chaotic world. I think in many ways, AI is accelerating the almost the kind of challenge which was already kind of prevalent in the system. So fast forward with AI and traffic volatility because of AI search means this revenue uncertainty hurts even more. Consumers have been given a lot of choice. Advertisers all of a sudden are looking at kind of a whole new set of players they can work with and engage with. I think for us, though, AI also has this kind of very foundational ability to create more direct pathways between advertisers and publishers and consumers. And we believe very passionately that actually AI gives us this reset on the ecosystem and how we do things, which allows us to build a much healthier, more resilient ecosystem off the back of that. So, for example, the work with Anthony and what they're doing at IAB Tech Lab, we're massive believers in, because we believe that if you can really harness the power of agentic advertising, actually you can make the economics of this ecosystem add up, and you can do things which weren't previously possible. Like today, we're so overwhelmed with the scale and volume of data. AI really makes that usable and possible. So we think probably the best bits of this ecosystem have been human and human led. but they've been very hard to scale. And that means we farmed a lot off to machines, and those machines just haven't been as good. Our hope is that in this next era, we can better combine those two things.
And
That's
how does
interesting.
that change your perception of your own role and responsibilities as a CEO and leader?
Yeah, I think when we started the business, we said that, hey, when we actually started the company, we started it because there was nowhere great to work in London at this point in time. We were both computer scientists. We were coming out of our degree, and all you could go and do was work in a bank. Now, for some people, that's really great, and there's certainly lots of money to be made if you're interested in it. But what we found with the work was that it wasn't personally rewarding because we couldn't tie our work back to the mission and vision of the business. And actually, we had very little autonomy. Instead, we're kind of implementing decisions which were made elsewhere and which no one took the time to explain to us. So with Permutive, actually, kind of the real reason why we started a business was we wanted a great place to work. And we were looking at these YC companies thinking, wow, like, wouldn't it be great to work there? But there were next to none in London. So it's like, well, we better go and start one. For us, what we define as impactful work was really kind of this notion of having an outsized contribution. And I think what we've really come to learn with AI is when used correctly, it can really allow people to focus on the parts of their job and the elements of their job where they create outsized impact. When we audit kind of our own weeks, when people at the company audit their week, the number one complaint we get back is how much time gets spent on repetitive work. And I really believe that it's now the responsibility of companies to really put in place the right systems and infrastructure so people can spend more of their time on that work. So, for example, we're going through this right now with our customer success organization. And I really believe at the end of this work with the customer success team, where we're focused on, hey, what can we do to help you better prepare for quarterly business reviews, to better understand changes in product metrics across your customer base, to better understand what's happening in the ecosystem. If we can give you those tools, the work will be infinitely more rewarding. And if you can pass off to those agents work which was repetitive and not creative in nature, actually, like, fast forward 12 months from now, and I think for a customer success manager, if you're looking outside of Permutive, actually in some ways kind of stepping into other roles, our hope would be that you would actually end up doing less meaningful work because of the systems and structures we put in place at Permutive. Now, there's a long way to go on that journey, but I can see it in a way in which maybe 6 months ago even, it was very hypothetical.
Joe, growing up in North London and now being in New York, how do you, final question, I think from us, how do you manage that Atlantic divide? How have you, let's just set that simply. How do you manage the Atlantic divide, like, with the people?
So culturally, big differences,
Right.
which I didn't imagine would be the case initially. So prior to moving out here, we'd always tried to run the company as if everyone in the world was English. So we kind of had these foundational assumptions about, like, what matters to someone in the UK, where, I don't know, we have a healthcare system, is very different to what matters to someone in the US where that doesn't exist. Now, we tried to kind of eliminate those differences in our mind. But I think kind of what we have come to learn over time is, like, actually, like, there are some, like, foundational differences. There's a lot more which unites us than divides us. That's certainly true.
Uh-huh.
But culturally, and I was speaking to someone this week who put it very well for me. I hadn't thought of it in this way prior, but she kind of explained it very simply. I think in the UK, we really prioritize social harmony. So that's a very important thing to UK culture. Whereas in the US, I'd say it's almost the opposite. I think kind of the notion of social harmony is much less important. And neither is right or wrong. They're just different ways of operating and working. And I think what we've tried to do is kind of take the best of both sides and bring them over. So kind of the US's willingness to engage in conflict and conversation, I think, is really healthy. It forces you to recognize problems and challenges and have a very honest conversation about that. Whereas that's not kind of the default in the UK. It's not what we like as a society in the UK. That kind of harms the social fabric. But I think that means we in the UK are far less able to kind of identify problems early and get to solving them. So it's a like very crude example, but
It's a good one.
the real differences. I think what we've learned is actually if you can take the best of those and bring them over, you can have a very kind of strong, powerful culture off the back of that.
So, Joe, to kind of wrap up, and some of the things that we heard here, and I want you to, if there's anything I miss in this that you really want to make a point of communicating, as a little bit of a recap here. First of all, the fact that you grew up with your dad as a pastor and your mom and aunt as therapists, and the autism connection. You had an incredible grounding in humanity and the things we like to talk about here at Lead Human. You talked about after you launched the business, you had some entrepreneurial back and forth with your partner, Tim, I think, right?
Yeah.
And 3 years wandering, another 6 to 7 years of a journey, kind of finding your way. But very important, what you learned is the importance of building a great product, building a great company, and of course, the focus on building a great team. You identified resilience as a key attribute. Right. You talked about building the company and product around being multicultural, purpose, mission driven. You just mentioned social harmony. You also talked about playing to the strengths of each team member, creating psychological safety within the organization, which everyone aspires to, but it's very difficult to deliver on in a real world. And it seems you've really been successful in doing that. You built the goal of early on of building a sustainable internet with privacy, trust at its core. And now you see both with your internal belief system and how you're evolving, seeing AI as a real opportunity for a reset on some of the key issues around the business. And I like that word reset. You talked about, kind of creating the opportunity for what you called an outsized contribution or impact because of the ability to use AI in a productive way, and rebuilding or rethinking and resetting the systems, the methods, and the infrastructure. So what did I miss that you'd like to reinforce? Or
well, let me give my couple, Jack.
You got it.
So
Tim.
Here's what I think I loved in addition to those was in the communicating with investors. You better have a filter on how are they viewing this, not what are you trying to do. And then with your people, when you want to communicate a vision about what it is you've got or what it is you think you're building toward, is keep it more grounded in today and don't get too far out ahead of your skis. Even if you guys as founders need to do that, when you're talking internally, you need to keep it something that's more digestible to the people who are working in the day-to-day. I thought those were two great pieces of advice. And then understanding the social harmony, meaning, I guess I'm taking that to mean some stuff kind of gets a little buried under the rug, maybe in the UK, so that we don't have to fight it out. Where in the US are like, no, we're going to be a little more in your face about it, and balancing the two because neither are right. I love that. That was really good sensitivity and really interesting.
God, those are perfect summaries.
All right, Jack, I think we're going to close it.
We are. I'm on my way to London. I'm going to use some of your advice and counsel while I'm there.
Smart.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Joe, very much. And we're going to thank the listeners. Thanks for being part of this. And if anything you learned today, and I'm sure there are some things that you feel like touched you and you really make you feel differently about leadership, please do share it. And join us on this journey now with Joe to help Lead Human, because even though machines, data, and dashboards are certainly powerful and necessary, that the real competitive advantage in business is still a human one and more about unleashing the human potential. And this has been Lead Human.